On the second day of 2015, the Samson Flat bushfire roared through the Mount Bera vineyard in the Adelaide Hills. It caused massive damage and burnt all vines to varying degrees. The recovery advice given at the time was to rip them all out and start again. Greg Horner, who owns and operates the vineyard, chose a different path, and this is his experience.
The key things I'd say to any grower is that don't panic. The vines look much worse. The amount of damage and the scorching can be there, but the vines can be still alive even upstairs when you don't think they are. But the important thing is that the vines are generally weeds. They'll push out shoots from the ground up, and even 2-month-old, 14-month-old vines and 20-year-old vines that we worked with, every single vine basically reshot from the ground. Some from deeper down than others, so they took a little bit longer to get to the surface, but the vines really do tell you what the issues are and what needs to be done. We had no idea really what to expect from the bushfire other than presentations that had been made about the non-uniformity of bushfires and how they burn randomly through the vineyard, and therefore the best thing to do was to rip the vines out and start again. But I completely disagree with that philosophy. It wasn't so much a decision, it was actually dictated because of practicalities. We'd lost every fence on the farm. We were trying to get stock contained in certain areas, and we couldn't do anything for a few weeks, and it wasn't very long though, and the vines were already pushing out new shoots from the ground that had been severely burnt. We didn't know what to expect. I mean, we do know from doing UDPA repairs that cutting off the trunks near ground level, the vines would always shoot out a new shoot. So we hoped that the soil hadn't been so badly heated that it would stop the growth. We did dig down for about a foot in some places, and the ground had obviously been heated quite severely down a foot deep. Yet even those vines shot out new shoots. They were 20-year-old vines, the ones that were near the pine trees, that everything within radiant distance of the pines was really completely destroyed. But on the amphitheatre vineyard, the northwest face of it in particular, where it came from the conservation park up through roared up the hill, those vines were only just over 12 months old. And they got a lot of heat, even from red gum that had fallen down and been dead there for 20 years. It burnt right through and completely wiped everything out, yet those vines that were young still came back as well. So the partially burnt stuff, and we did a few tests, we cut off a few trunks, and some were burnt halfway around, some were burnt 75%, some were burnt 90%, and some of course were burnt 100% of the way around. Again, we are organic, so you'll see there's all the grass under the vine, and that doesn't help in a bushfire by any means, so it burns right around the trunk. The difficult decision was, what do we do with the vines? And in those sections that were what we could see some still green life, we left them. And what we aimed to do was to see which vines pushed out new water shoots from the ground, which vines pushed out shoots from the trunk, and which ones pushed out shoots from the cordon. And you could see then, based on where they shot from, you could tell roughly what percentage of trunk was actually damaged. The bottom line was that up to 50% of burn right around the circumference of the trunk. Those vines generally produce nearly a full crop, and it depended on like if you picture the flow, half of the trunk being viable and half not, it depended on how far up it burnt the trunk and then whether the sap flow could actually spread around the side of the trunk and go to the other parts of the vine, or whether it was burnt a long way up. But in general, 50% we had no problem, we had a full crop. 50 to 75%, once you get past 75%, we'd end up with growth on the spur that was like maybe a foot long or 6 inches long. And those ones were clearly telling us that the trunk had a fairly severe damage and the vine was no longer viable. So what we did is we waited for the water shoot to come out of the ground, and we used that, and we wrapped it down for the following year. And for that whole vineyard, we left for 3 years while we grew up all water shoots from every vine. We got a crop the whole time, and then at the end of it, we ripped out those vines that had been burnt and had new unburnt sections for the vines, so we got a crop nearly the whole way through. The biggest section that we left without beheading was the ones that had been top worked, so they had We had Merlot planted there that we'd grafted Shiraz in one section and Tempranillo in another section. Those vines, what we did again, we just left them, we pruned them. They were spur pruned, so we just continued doing that. And what we did aim to do was look at the material of how much dead wood there was either on the cordon, where the flames had come from the grass underneath and burnt the cordon, or whether the trunk had been burnt and how much of the canopy had been burnt. The vine tells you exactly. If the trunk's completely burnt, you will get a shoot from the ground. And the earlier that shoot comes out, the more you know the trunk's completely not functioning. Some vines will take longer because, again, we dug down into the ground and we could find that the bud that was forming was maybe a foot down instead of 6 inches or 2 inches underground. And so those ones just take longer to get to the surface. Well, we didn't. Other than the young vines, we didn't get water on until the following season. In fact, for the Cabernet just up over behind us here, we didn't get it on until February in that following year, the following vintage. Yeah, I think it depends partially on the soil. Like our soil is rich red iron, magnesium, clay, loam sort of soil, so it holds quite a lot of water down deep. So I think that water is good because it's there, whereas if it was a really light sandy soil, probably you would have to get water on quicker, I would say. Yes, I hurt my back very badly with a chainsaw, and it was very difficult because there were no posts in the vineyard, particularly in that section of Pinot Noir that got completely hammered from the pine trees. And I was chainsawing right down low, so it's quite hard on the back, and you have to avoid wires and all the bits and pieces around you. And then I ended up, a friend recommended a Black & Decker Alligator, which is designed for small prunings up to about 10 centimetres in diameter. It's the best thing I've ever bought. It's battery operated. You only turn it on, it's got 2 little guards, you use 2 hands, it's light, you can get down on one knee and a hand and whatever and do it on the ground, and that was the best thing I bought for the vineyard clearing. A massive amount of financial damage. I mean, we end up with probably about $1.5 million worth of debt over the 3-year period. Lost crops, all the work we had to do, and we did a lot of the work ourselves, of course, because then it wasn't paid for, so that was the financial difficulty. So if you have to pay for someone, it couldn't have happened. We just couldn't have done it. I think part of it's a healing process when all the kids were involved in pulling vines out, and you get all those wins where you see the vine row finished, the bonfire getting bigger, regeneration from the ground. I think that's a healing process that all of us went through. The hardest part were other aspects rather than the vineyard as far as the emotional side, but the vineyard-wise, I think it was a good process to have everyone involved in trying to help things out. Oh, there's always hope, and I think the thing is, even if you can't get to things quickly, it's not going to make that much difference, generally, I don't believe. It's that you have lots of time, and we were still pulling out vines in September or October, and we were still getting dripper lines on in the February the following year. It was just a case of doing what we could do. And the fact that the vines are pretty good at pushing out stuff, and it doesn't really matter if it's a bit of a mess, you can then clean it up the following season. That's the good thing about vines.